openers.
That one, dude, if anyone's not read the comment, did we talk about how Tim Pool confirmed everything we knew? Tim Polenstein story blew me away when I read it. I was like, this has to be fake. When I first saw the news break, it's like, dude, please tell me that this is a fake news story. And I'm like, I'm just on the wrong side of that of X. No, it's not fake. Tim Pool met in secret with Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm still like, I'm shook right now. Like, there's no way this is real. But again, I'm not shocked either. So,
right, yeah, and we'll get right into that one here first. Actually, let me put it on the screen here. But we got a few little clips. I was actually watching the show when Tim Pool announced it, and it was pretty funny. Actually, I mean, he seemed like he was being really transparent, not like he was trying to, hide anything. And he kind of explained what it was called. I can't remember the word. He'll say it here again. I think it's here is called Chatham House Rules. And that means that you cannot reveal anybody who attended nor attribute anything said to any one individual. And so you can kind of say stuff, but you can't have a quote attached to it. And he went another further step, or then he went a step further and said that if you want an official statement, you request it, and then within a couple days, they actually will give you their official written statement on it if they have one.
Yeah. Well, so I like I liked Anomaly's quote on this, but I actually went ahead and I added a fuller version that Timcast News actually posted, which includes this portion of the clip and then what he said after as well. It's about 4 minutes long because I wanted to make sure that we didn't cover it. I know all the people who are like, the pro-Israel guys in here, so I wanted to make sure I included like Tim's full statement from what he had said there. It's like 4 minute long clip there.
Let me see. Let me find it. Is it the third one down?
Yeah, third one down. Yeah, where it says the author is Timcast News.
Okay.
I just still like I'm not shocked by any means, but for me it was the specific nature of like what the article had said that was getting like quoted and put out everywhere, which he denies is how it went down. But as it was quoted in the article, basically had said that when Tim was a part of this meeting, that he was the one who had initiated the conversation, saying that he believes there was a Qatari op, that there is a Qatari op that is botting and funding a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment. But in the clip here, he denies it and says he was asking questions like, is there truth to these allegations that there is a Qatari op funding these people? And so like that's the kind of difference that's being made there. But I think either way, but despite like the small kind of minor combatants there, the bigger story is the fact that Tim Pool met in private along with a bunch of other influencers, one of which is the Jessica Lee Krause girl who's attached to the RFK story. If you remember when we covered it, she was one of the pundits who was arguing on group chat that Candace Owens had exposed, who was like close to Olivia Nuzzi, who was like basically RFK's campaign correspondent that was involved in the affair and the allegations, which still we haven't gotten any word yet on if RFK is truly compromised or not, based on his kind of changing of how he was with measles. But like Dave Rubin and a few other influencers were involved in that too. They were there. Now, what I will say too, forgive me, I keep struggling to speak. The main point, yeah, I know I couldn't talk. The main point was that there was more influencers there, and it just so happens that obviously Tim Pool is being pointed out because of obviously his like fence sitting on this issue, or his appearance of fence sitting. But secondly, that like he was the first to kind of come forward and say, yes, it happened, when he's outlining like the Chatham House rules. So he was like, I thought we were under the guise that like no one was going to say anything about this meeting. But since it's already going public, he's kind of getting ahead of it and being like, well, here's what I said. Here's what happened with it. So at least I can appreciate he's owning it. But meanwhile, it's like, where was the rest of the influencers to say anything? I think I saw a statement from Dave Rubin earlier today, like this morning, finally said something about it, but I haven't seen any of the other influencers mention their involvement with what happened there.
Right. And it's funny because Tim Pool made the assumption that these people didn't even know what Chatham House rules are. And so he assumed that a lot of stuff was going to come out and have quotes attached to it and videos themselves. He even mentioned, and he might say this here, but just recalling from what he said, he even mentioned that some of these folks, these influencers that were invited, the MAGA influencers or whoever they are, were filming, walking around with their phones up and everything. So just completely disregarding or ignorant of the Chatham House rules, which I just find funny. The new wave of media just doesn't have the same old decorum and doesn't know the standards that they've followed and practiced in the past. But I'm all
Right.
for it. I want more transparency, and if we can chalk it up to ignorance, I'm fine with it as long as we get the more information we get, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously the main question is again, like, why is Israel coordinating, with influencers for a foreign country's sentiment here? And I think the reason why it sticks out a lot too is in tandem with another story, which is the fact that we have, for what department is in charge of that? I had it attached here. Oh, it's the DHS. So the DHS, which is Department of Homeland Security, is screening immigrants who are trying to come over here into the States. They're screening their social media to see if they've ever been anti-Israel, and if they have been, they won't be allowed into the country.
Into the United States.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, like, you get these stories in tandem, and you obviously, with everything else that's involved, that's led up to this, and in the aggregate of everything involved with this foreign country, again, you come to this position, which is like, what is driving the sentiment that is placing Israel ahead of the USA, right? Which is like, why when have we ever had like an anti-American task force, right? Why are we not seeing the story being like, and we're scanning their social media to see if they've ever been anti-America, and if they've ever been anti-American, then they're not getting in the country. But it's not that. It's at the behest of another country that's like not America. These are the questions that I think, at the most base level, from most people, at least pique their interest, and it has that Streisand effect, which is they begin to look at it and they go, yeah, this doesn't make any sense, man. Like, we've been anti-white and anti-America for how long? No one gave a shit for like the last 10 years, but Trump gets in, and instead of deporting all the people who are anti-America, anti-white, we're deporting those who are anti-Israel. It's like, why is that getting the priority? Why
Why
is
is it
that?
even a factor? I don't
Right, or
even
yeah,
understand why it's a factor.
right, who cares in the first place about it? So I think from a very basic America First standpoint, you go, this seems entirely unnecessary to getting the job done.
Yeah, unnecessary and potential overreach. But let's play this video here from Tim Pool. I just want to read Tim Anomaly's attachment to it. It said Tim Pool thought he was going to meet with the prime minister of a foreign country, and it was going to stay completely secret from the public. And then Timcast News actually posted this longer video, quotes, absolutely fake news. Tim Pool sets the record straight on the misleading coverage of his roundtable discussion with Benjamin Netanyahu. So let's go ahead and we'll just play this video now.
I got late word that I was invited to a private roundtable meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It was under what's called Chatham House rules. For those that are not familiar, this means that you cannot reveal anybody who attended, nor attribute anything to any one individual, as they can deny it, and they would. However, what I love about what the White House is currently doing, when you bring together a bunch of influencers and podcasters who don't know much about journalism culture, whatever you want to call it, not that we respect it tremendously, most people didn't know what Chatham House meant. So with all due respect, it's funny because they bring us into the Blair House, which is where Netanyahu was staying. And immediately people are walking around with their cameras, their phones up. They actually took our phones from us. And I legit thought they would maintain Chatham House rules, meaning you can't quote the prime minister, you can't quote his officials and the other people who were there, but you can report what was said generally. If you wanted an official quote on a specific matter, you would then ask an official once the meeting was wrapped, and they'd provide you the exact quote. Or they would just say outright, like, we ain't putting our quotes on that one. So the story that comes out, which basically violated whatever, I was going to talk about what we went there for a reason. This story from Jewish Insider says Netanyahu pushes back on anti-Israel trends in a meeting with podcasters. I don't know if the individual who wrote this, Lahav Harkov, was actually there, but this is wrong. It's fake news. And people are now spreading fake news about me because I'm going to go ahead and say as arrogantly as I can to everyone else who was there. I hope you all hear me, because I'm saying this somewhat facetiously. I think I was the only one that asked a real question. Now that I've pissed off all the other journalists and individuals who were there, most people were asking what I would describe as I don't know. I felt like pretty obvious questions. Is there going to be a war with Iran? Do you think the nuclear talks are going to be good? That Trump is going to be talking with you? Will it work out for you? What's the concern? What's going on with your prime ministership or whatever? And you get these answers that I really felt like you could have just got a Fox News. You know, the prime minister is going to get asked about this stuff and he's going to say, I can't speak too much on the nuclear deals, blah, blah, blah. Considering this was Chatham House and it was expected whatever he said was going to come out, I didn't see anything really substantive. However, in the story, they say, Poole expressed concerns about increased anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the pro-Trump podcasting space, according to sources in the room. So they weren't there. Poole famously had Kanye West on his podcast, and the rapper walked out mid-interview after Poole pushed back against anti-Semitic comments. Responding to Poole, Netanyahu said that the reason he invited the group is to meet with him. To me? Poole argued that there is a Qatari op to manipulate social media algorithms to make anti-Semitic and anti-Israel episodes appear to receive far more views than, say, tips for picking up women, in order to incentivize podcasters and YouTubers to produce more anti-Semitic content. Netanyahu, however, was non-committal in his response, saying that's only possible. Fake news!
How dare you, Tim?
Absolute fake news. It's close to reality, but this is what they do, okay? First, the person who was there clearly wasn't there. Ask somebody who then conveyed incorrectly what I actually said. I said, there has been a report released from pro-Israel sources alleging Qatar is funding bots and operations to promote anti-Israel content. Is there any evidence that's true? And he said, I don't know. It's possible. That's what happened. I did not say they actually were doing that because I don't know that they're actually doing it. However, I did, to a variety of people, express what I've expressed on this show, that there are clearly bots that are anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. That is not to say that people who are critical of Israel don't exist or that no one is critical of Israel. People certainly are.
Right. And so the reason why this actually, it stood out a bit to me, which there's another clip which I can find because it's also from the guy who Anomaly was quoting. And this is kind of in response, I think, what TNT had asked, which he said, why do you assume it's to promote another country's sentiment? Which this is the reason why Tim Pool had felt the obligation to go, which in this other clip, he mentions that he says, what he sees is the left is already there. The left is already, what's the right word? Anti-Israel. And that what he sees is in the right wing is that the anti-Israel right wing is growing. And so what he was saying was the reason why he thinks it's imperative for Israel to get a hold on pushing for its own sentiment in the country is because he thinks in 20 years there will be no support for Israel in America, which is actually spot on because AF Post had actually, there's another article in here somewhere that I can have. Yeah, so the majority of Americans actually hold unfavorable view of Israel. This was actually reported by not AF Post. Who reported that? Pew Research Center reported it, saying for the first time in decades, a majority, 53% of Americans view Israel unfavorably. 50% of Republicans, 18 to 49, hold an unfavorable view of Israel, while older Republicans hold an overwhelmingly favorable view. So the whole idea of this, this meeting with the influencers is the same way to kind of narrative craft and sentiment push. That's really the whole reason why influencers are invited to these spaces at all, period. Now, we don't have a full list of who was there, I don't think, at least not that I've seen. But the idea behind the meeting was to push things for a pro-Israel direction. It was kind of meeting with these influencers to get a kind of briefing of like what their thoughts and opinions are of the current sentiment when it does come to Israel, which is obviously why you have Tim Pool asking about, are these allegations true about the anti-Israel sentiment with the push? So even if you take Tim Pool at his word, which is he didn't say it as fact, he was asking about the validity of this report. It's because the whole conversation about that revolved around how can you reshape the narrative around Israel. So the whole thing was meant in a sense to kind of gauge what the next step should be to promoting a healthy pro-Israel sentiment, which is what their kind of prerogative was.
Right. And I mean, it just, of course, naturally, it's not going to be anti-Israel sentiment. They're not going to have the meeting in the first place, if you know what I mean. It's just to basically maybe, in my opinion, set a few new talking points. Essentially, propagandize some of these people that they see as the, the top influencers on the right. Essentially, like you said, we don't know exactly who it was, and we'll probably never know exactly what was said. But I think it's safe to say that, safe to assume that it was a pro-Israel sentiment kind of feeling in the room.
Right.
And Steve mentioned something about Tim Pool a little while ago. Let's see, where's it at? Let me go back up here. In the past, Tim Pool shut down co-hosts who brought up the U.S. Liberty attack and basically anything that leads to anything Israel's done as far as influencing our politics or nefarious actions. And I would argue making an excuse for Tim Pool, but that's a business decision that Tim has chose not to go there, because the platforms that he's that he's on most prominently, YouTube, doesn't like it. And
Right.
so when you're making millions of dollars off of a platform, typically you don't elect to say the things that they don't like, right? If you can fill your time with plenty of other relevant stuff, you just don't go to that 1%. It's a smart business decision, and it's something that we should probably take his advice and follow his steps. You know what I mean? A little bit more, but it just is what it is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reason why I think it's obviously major news is because people are just concerned. Obviously, this is like we've been talking about for weeks now. This topic can't leave the room. It is kind of baked into the news cycle right now, because when you begin declassifying all these documents, which was promised with the Trump stuff, as well as the current ongoings of the Middle East, it's like they're everywhere. It's like you really can't like escape it, and so it
Right.
becomes to be more major news when you're taking some of like the largest influencers in the space, which I think Tim Pool's live show is like, in terms of conservative American media, it's like in the top 3, top 2, maybe even the number 1.
Well,
in the
Rumble
space.
Live he is. Rumble Live he is.
Oh, so
The
he is
top-
number 1 Rumble Live. So
Yeah,
then
his daily show, that Rumble lineup has been top streaming shows for like 2 weeks now. Crowder. We talked about some of the other people. I can't remember the girl who goes on before. There's another dude that goes on before. Then there's Crowder, and then there's Tim Pool, the quartering. I think Russell Brand is even in that mix somewhere.
Yeah, and Viva Fry's in there too.
Right. And so, Benny Johnson, he's on Rumble, or he's on YouTube mostly. I think he's on Rumble some, but I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to Benny lately, to be honest with you. But these dudes are the top streaming shows period on the Rumble platform, and that actually is across the board when you add Twitch and YouTube and everything else in there. So I mean, these guys are the top of the the lineup essentially.
Right. And then you have like people like Steven Crowder, who have basically taken their whole Rumble journey in this direction. I mean, like, that's basically been a lot of his topics over the last couple. I mean, since he's went to Rumble, right? I mean, he even had the famous, viral moment of clipping a very unpopular image, which was used as like the, to shape up the files. I forget the word. It was like the silhouette, basically. And, posting all these things, and he's having, consistent sections now outlining like his kind of discontent with things like AIPAC and like the lobbying and like just the overall kind of influence that they kind of exert over politics. He's kind of disinterested in. And I think all in all, what you can just basically see as a takeaway is it's clear that the conversation's changing. And I think what most people can take away from this is the fact that very vocal like minority, like that 5% who is very, very like on the right wing, the dissident right group, who's very, very, very anti Israel, is kind of having the same effect as what the very, 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 very vocal 5% progressive minority had when they started kicking in doors over the transgender issue and the very progressive woke politics, right? It was all of those Democrats said, hey, it's not us. But what the right wing has learned, and I'm glad that they did, which is you don't have to have the majority to make a difference in politics. You can be the extreme vocal minority. And as long as you're constantly ratioing people, you're constantly dropping facts, you're posting, your shit posting all the time, and you're gaining influence and clout, you can hold a meaningful amount of influence. And I think specifically when you see now other creators like Michael Knowles and Charlie Kirk, Trent Horn being pressed on this issue in public events now too, from other people who have been probably following. Maybe this guy watches Elijah Schaffer and he watches Charlie Kirk, but he goes to the Charlie Kirk event because of all the things Elijah Schaffer may say about Israel that he doesn't hear about Charlie Kirk. He wants to hear Charlie Kirk give an answer. And so you're seeing the right, at least, the dissident right wing, adopting what the far left had done in terms of being able to swing their kind of meager power and influence and make a difference about it, which I think in the whole is good, which I think it might be the first time in my lifetime I've ever seen the right wing learn from the left to begin to enact politics towards their side of things, because all of politics for the last, 100 years has been, as House always points out too, very accurately, has been a slow draw towards the left, with the right wing only being a meaningful speed bump, which is really to just kind of like slow things down a little bit while the left continually drags us unwillingly to that side. Right. I'll take a right wing finally doing it to the other way around, which is like we're slowly dragging things to the right wing now. Like now we're pulling people, dragging their nails across to get the Overton window to shift over.
Yeah, 100%. I saw Evil Elmo said, did I say Tim Pool was a conservative? He corrected me. He said Tim Pool conservative. I didn't really mean that Tim Pool is conservative. I just mean that his audience is in this space. I'd argue that the majority of his audience is on the conservative side. I'm sure there's some Democrats I think there's some Democrats that hate watching stuff like that, but for the most part, Tim Pool is a thought leader on the conservative side, regardless of his own personal politics. He is pro-Trump, and I think that's kind of the lowest common denominator that his audience has with him.
Yeah.
For the most part.
I think he's, at least as of right now, as much as he wants to ride the fence on things, he's at least like center right in today's Overton window of politics. I think he's like now like a 2-time Trump voter, very, very strong on 2A, which was something he originally wasn't strong on. I'm no fan of Tim Pool, don't get me wrong either. I just think if you look at all the other kind of things that would maybe signify someone's conservative, he has them. I mean, you look at his like most top
last night I wasn't here.
Partnership was with the Daily Wire, right? Like he's constantly it's like Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Jeremy Boring, Andrew Claiborne are always kind of cycling in and out of his podcast room. So he's basically like a platform for a lot of conservative voices.
Right.
But overall, I mean, I do agree. Like he's not conservative by any traditional sense of the term. He's, he's like a liberal at heart.
And to that last point that you made about the Daily Wire, when you apply the opposite people, you don't see people like David Pacman, Destiny, Harry Sisson. Did Jink recently? I think Jink actually recently did go on the Timcast IRL show when he was doing that circuit. I think he actually did maybe appear on Timcast, but one of the rare lefties that progressives that will actually go on Tim Pool's show, which I think is indicative of Tim's audience and in the media sphere, as Tix Bonner worded it, that he's in the conservative side. Is on the whole media sphere side of things there. So,
right.
When the left won't talk to you, you're definitely not a lefty for the most part, right? You do get the exceptions. What Sam Cedar went on there and argued with him and made himself look like an idiot a couple months back.
Right. What Sam Cedar is just kind of insane.
Right. Evil Elmo mentions the Overton window moved. He didn't. Same with Joe. And the left them. Yeah, exactly. That's what happened to Elon. That's what happened to Trump. Potentially RFK, certainly Tulsi, which is why we kind of gravitate to have these connections with some of these traditional Democrats that MAGA can see eye to eye with, which is also indicative that MAGA isn't necessarily a cult. We're willing to have a conversation with anybody and accept. When somebody says, hey, I was wrong. I mean, even Lindy Lee, one of the top fundraisers for the Democrat Party, she has been taking it in the worst ways from the Democrat Party, all for her basically saying that she didn't like the fact that the Kamala Harris campaign was lying to her and by proxy lying to her donors. She feels betrayed. And they call her the worst names that you can call an Asian person, that you can call a woman.
They're funny, though.
And she was on Piers Morgan just today, Lindy Lee. Oh, Mindy Lee too. I don't know who that. Maybe you're mentioning somebody else, just me. But yeah, when somebody that's raised tens of millions for the Democrat Party is now out here saying, "Look, I lost 25." This is a quote. It's not an exact quote, but she said something to the effect of, "I've lost 25% of my uh, net worth in the last week due to chicken comments." Due to okay, so Lindy Lee said, I've lost 25% of my net worth in the last week due to this Trump tariff stuff, talking about the stock that she's lost. And she says, I don't care. I'm willing to ride with Trump on this. And that's huge for somebody that's literally raised tens of millions of dollars for the Democrat Party to try to get Democrats elected in multiple elections. For her to sit here and say, I trust Trump, that's a big, big U-turn. And I would not be surprised, and I've said this before, that Lindy Lee, if Lindy Lee raises money for the next Republican candidate, if it's JD Vance particularly, or somebody that takes the hard kind of MAGA stance, and aligns with Trump, gets Trump's approval. Still some time to, for things to happen and change your mind. But right now, man, she's that's the last person on earth that you would think would flip sides. You know what I mean? So,
well, I think what, especially in the politic environment, there got to be a distinction that's made. And I think the same way I would make it about Tim Pool. There's a lot of people in this space whose entire priority is not like their values in politics. It's how they can make as much money as humanly possible off of politics. And so I view Lindy Lee in that same kind of light, where she just kind of sees where the money's going, like what's the right or the acceptable or the more profitable thing to do. And it's like, now it's to support Trump. Like now my all my identity and values and principles are with Trump over here. And same thing when you see it with other individuals, a lot, especially like in the financial space as well. A lot of like the economists too will just change their tune at the drop of a hat. And it's not because they care about their values that the left-wing party had. It's because they care that like that's where they were making the most money. And I think with what you had alluded to with Tim Pool as well, like I don't know if it's really because he's truly got like a deep, strong kind of like tie to Israel or stance really, or maybe more so for him, it's just like he wants to be a part of the conservative gatekeeper group because he wants to make that much money. And so I think for me personally, I don't think Tim's like this kind of like espionage agent for Israel. I think like he's just largely prioritizes making money more so than he prioritizes being fully 100% like free speech absolutism. And I think that's kind of like where I view Tim Pool to be, less so that he's like this nefarious actor trying to like subvert things. I think just by proxy of taking money and not saying things, you're subverting things, yes, like on a secondary level, but I don't think like that's his main priority. I think he's just kind of like a guy who was in the right place at the right time and now bumping into a lot of shoulders from Wall Street, grew up on a huge page. And now he's kind of looking of like, well, if I want to maintain this current profit margin and own this company, and he's already spoken to it too, right? Like he wants to get to a point where he's like not having to do as much work and like kind of like taking steps away from things. So like a lot of the time when you listen to him, a lot of what you hear Tim Pool talk about is money and company and things like that. And you kind of get this sense that he's like tired of doing the same routine. So I think for me, when I hear him talk about anything like this in relation to it, I think it's him kind of, jockeying for position to like always be ahead of things, make as much money, because I think his long-term goal is probably to get someone to take over that hosting position for him. So he can kind of be this figure out in the distance, kind of like a Jeremy Boring figure, where he'll come onto the shows and say something occasionally, but it's really all of the guys that he kind of grew and maintained, and his underling hosts, if you will, to take over for him at some point.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think he'll always want to have a talk show, but maybe he just wants to only have the talk show and not have to worry about paying all the bills and stuff like that. I remember I've heard him say in the past that maybe he should have just, made videos and not worried about building an empire. And he sees other people that have kind of done it that way. And he's like, dang, I could have just had a lot more money in the bank and not have to worry about all this extra responsibility. But, he's made the choice that he wants to build culture, and he's reinvesting all of his earnings for the most part. And so like back into the company, I mean, and, it's like you
Right.
said, he kind of found himself in the right place at the right time with a couple situations. And, you know, then when he started that live show, giving people access to all these different personalities and opinions, was something that people gravitated to. And, you know, and then he just elects, and he said this part before too. He's like, if I can say 99.9% of everything and just avoid that 0.1%,
Right.
maintain my business and not just kill my own business because I got to say that 0.1%. He's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I take away everything so that I can say the 0.1%?
Right.
You know, and so it makes sense, especially when you consider YouTube pays you to make videos on their platform. There's no down payment. There's no investment. It's just you make videos, you post it. And if
Right.
you're good at it, if people like it, they're going to pay you for it. and
Right.
so following the rules that YouTube has is something that I understand, something that I appreciate, and I choose to follow, not say the 1%. You know, you saw a struggle last week. You saw me struggle last show. I mean, talking about the whole COVID situation. You know what I mean? Some of the things that you're not allowed to say about it. And it
Right.
sucks because it's real simple to say. Everybody understands it, and so you just have to kind of avoid it, and then you're able to continue. But if you want to say that last little bit, then good luck.